Our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really want
to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. So we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren.
Our award-winning show is back, and this season promises to be even more exciting than before. What's Up, Doc isn't just a title, it's a call to action for anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being. Join us on this thrilling ride towards better health on WESN Content Capital.
As always, we appreciate you starting your day with us. Let's get into this morning's first conversation.
Is the country's healthcare system more at risk more than ever?
Why it has remained unaddressed for so long.
Political parties get lots of cash, big cash from financiers, and then when they get that now, you can't account for it.
But it's really the specialist nurses who we are in a greater shortfall for.
We can tap into the resources and have them, at least form some mentorship programs.
Highlight our food systems, and which will attract persons from all over the world to come and experience something that actually supports the local economy.
We're lucky that we have a vibrant legal system that allows change to take place, and it's not that matters are just swept under the carpet and discrimination is allowed to be perpetrated.
A lot of people don't know that there were attempts to ban the carnival, suppress the carnival.
WESN.
Well, welcome back. It's been a while. Another day in paradise. Another file has gone missing. We'll save that one maybe for tomorrow. But in the meantime, there are a couple of things to try to catch up on with regards to the ongoing day-to-day drama of TNT. Now, I'm not ready, and I know that people are not necessarily going to hear this because they'll tune in late, or they might actually be hearing this and they won't take what I'm saying and properly interpret it, because at some point I'll touch on the emotional side of their reasoning and they won't like that, regardless of who they support. But I'm not necessarily ready to say, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. But some of the things that I was concerned about from the very beginning of the new administration, because no one is perfect and everyone has vulnerabilities. Some of those things, I haven't seen them come to pass, but they're kind of showing up. But before I get into that, a couple of things to get through. First of all, the Commissioner of Police has indicated that, well, I guess you could say it's his intention to try to deal with requests up to 6 months old, because the certificate of good character is only valid for 6 months. Requests for firearm user license from prison officers and police officers, private licenses, so they could therefore have private firearms to defend themselves. The problem with this is, well, let me not say the problem. One of the questions is, to what extent, if certificates of good character are needed for agents of law enforcement to apply for private firearms, to what extent should we then question, wasn't that technically, or shouldn't that have been seen about when they were employed by their employer, because they have jobs that have significant responsibility, power and authority over other citizens of the country. This is not the kind of thing where you want someone of bad character to be a prison officer or a police officer. So while on one hand, the commissioner is being very practical about it, and make no mistake, at the very least for the police, I can't speak to the prison service, but at the very least, if a police officer wanted to do something in bad faith, right, wanted to do something malicious with a firearm, they have access to guns. Not having a private firearm is not an obstacle for that. So at least with the police officers, for the most part, all of the officers that do not engage in any sort of gun crime, it's because they have the self-control, they have the self-restraint, right? So to some extent, do we need necessarily to be questioning things like that? But in the long run, it's very weird, and it could just be a bureaucratic issue. But it's very weird that police officers, to apply for a private firearm, will still have their character technically questioned by the process. Now, maybe it's fine if you want to say sometimes it's fine to have redundancy. But the flip side is, what happens to police officers that fail? Because at least back in the day, a police officer had a certain amount of respect throughout the world, whether rightfully or wrongfully so, right? Not all police officers historically have been benevolent people, have been upstanding, righteous people. I'm talking around the world, not just TNT. But for the most part, that was the expectation of police officers. That was the reputation of police officers. So what happens if a police officer fails a certificate of good character? And let's not forget, I believe it was the commissioner himself that said, we need to be examples. Not me, the TTPS. We need to be role models in society for the young people. And I applauded that. But I guess now comes the follow-up question of, is it just we're just not dealing with it? I guess it's not up to him to change the legal requirements. But it is telling. It is telling because in theory, it's highly inefficient. Maybe I'm wrong. Another thing to point out, I believe this was over the weekend, an illegal quarry operator who apparently has ties to both the PNM and the UNC has pumped tons of silt into the Guanapo River. And this comes just after the government made significant progress. Definitely, they communicated the point to us to a very repetitive degree, or maybe not repetitive, but a thorough degree. They were definitely directly speaking about the issue of clearing waterways. Only to hear about a quarry operator just dumping. WASA has come out and spoken out against it. Very interesting if this is corporate WASA or political WASA, because political WASA has ties to the current administration, or political any public sector entity will have ties to the current administration. The public utility WASA, corporate WASA, that would be a bit more neutral. It's interesting. Who exactly sent out that statement? We don't know. We don't know for sure. We just know that it is under the veneer of WASA. So my question is this. It's nice that it came out in the news. Now, maybe I missed it. First of all, we have issues with illegal quarrying. We have issues with a lack of town and country planning. We have issues with illegal dumping. Now you mean to tell me, because it's one thing to try to regulate every Tom, Dick, and Harry that has a paper cup or a plastic bottle or a styrofoam container. And then you're not just regulating every member of the population. Every Jane, Sue, Mary, John, Joseph, Ezekiel, you're not just monitoring them once. You have to monitor every single piece of plastic, styrofoam, even paper litter, appliances, everything. 365 days a year. But how many quarrying operations are there? How many quarries have easy access to rivers? How many quarries could easily just take all their debris, all their waste, with their right hand, stuff it in their pocket, walk to a river, and throw it out? It's a little bit more obvious when a quarry wants to dump stuff, right? When a large corporate entity wants to, I don't know, litter. And then, of course, it should be obvious. It should not be that hard to monitor all quarries with regards to this issue, I would think. You don't need to catch all the trucks. You just need to catch one truck, and then all of a sudden you have an arrow pointing who to focus your efforts on today. But then, more importantly, WASA is a state entity. It has come out. It hasn't necessarily said who. But as I pointed out, with regards to within the government, it's almost like if there are certain aspects of our society, certain rules and regulations, certain pieces of legislation, certain laws that are not subjective, that are not conditional, that are not optional. And there are certain aspects, certain subsections of our legal code where it doesn't seem that we have anyone that actually enforces them. Whether it is enforcing the law that says the Minister of Finance has to take the Auditor General report to whenever the next sitting of the Senate is, whether the President has to send the merit list to Parliament, or, well, in this case, one who is going to, for the state, champion things like noise pollution, illegal dumping. Do we have enough proper labor protections, not just assuming that the employer is wrong or assuming that the employee is wrong? On top of many other things. There are a lot of things that are not necessarily properly monitored and properly enforced. And look, we ain't special in that regard, right? You'll find that anywhere else. The question is to what degree? To what degree would it be blatant? To what degree would it be ignored? And to what degree, well, unknowingly, the population complain about these things. But yet, we lack the political/societal will to actually do anything about it, because it's one thing to resist change because we like it the way things are. It's another thing to resist change while we hate the way how things are. And that's why when people say Trinidad is not a real place, Tobago's a bit more solidified in its existence, to be honest. But Trinidad is not a real place. I can't argue against that. We complain about things, but we don't want to fix it. We complain about things, but we don't want to put the effort to do anything about it. We complain about things, then we want the people who we complain did the wrong to somehow magically fix the wrong that they did. The same pool of people. Case in point, the Prime Minister did not limit her cabinet to the same pool of people. That's one of the reasons why I have hope for this administration. She didn't just recycle the nonsense. Although you can't get away from some political nonsense, to be fair to her. Last thing I want to touch on before, although this is so big, it almost, maybe it should have been in the daily review, but it's a bit more subjective. I didn't necessarily want to spend too much time on it. But there's a lot of talk that came out of the whole situation where a bill was passed, both in, I believe, in the lower house on Friday and then in the Senate. Was it yesterday? With regards to changing the qualifications or the qualifiers for getting pension as Prime Minister. So, of course, the opposition basically is decrying the situation, saying it's an ad hominem, it's targeted specifically at Stuart Young. How dare they? It's immoral. I just would like to know if there's any political strategist in the room when the 12 of them, 13 of them, I can't remember at this point because I'm starting to not really care. It's amazing that you lost that, and I've said this before, but I can't get over this fact. You lost that spectacularly, and yet you're arrogant enough to say, we know better than anybody else, so we're going to do what we do best, which at this point is lose. What you do best is lose. What else am I supposed to say? Because at the end of the day, it is nice that you have, you know, Stuart Young. I didn't enter politics for personal benefit. And then the picture used for the article in Guardian Media, I think this was also on their social media, right? So I think it could have been either Guardian or CNC3's social media. But I have to point this out. They used a photo of the, you know, the lineup of prime ministers in the airport. You have Keith Rowley, Stuart Young, Kamala Persad-Bissessar. Stuart Young, he was prime minister for what, 2 months? He has his photo in Piarco. I don't know why. So, he's of course saying, I didn't come into politics for personal gain. I'm sorry, buddy. Given how you got the role of prime minister, which isn't that bad, legally, somebody had to be prime minister, and to be honest, once Dr. Keith Rowley said, I'm out with regards to the office of the prime minister, technically speaking, that's the only way to select the new prime minister. Because if he said he's not waiting for a convention, then, and to some extent, it's the MPs that select the prime minister, not the party. But you see, usually that will be a moot point because traditionally it's the political leader. But you could have an interim prime minister, and I called Stuart Young interim for that reason. But they didn't do the follow-up. They didn't do their due diligence. They didn't cement the position, the given theory, the theory of, I can't remember the proper term there that I'm looking for, the going theory, there we go, is that Stuart Young would not have had the support of the party to be political leader. Wah, wah. You know, Colin Mbek could slam the UNC. The opposition leader, I believe, could slam the UNC. The problem with all of that is, does anyone think the public did not look at the situation where he was prime minister for not even 6 months and is going to get the recently increased compensation package That was one of the reasons why you lost the election. So therein lies the brilliant political strategy of the PNM. Let's double down on one of the key issues that lost us the election, the SRC salary recommendations. Because not only now do we want to make it painfully blatant that it was a money grab, and I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying that's what you're making it look like. You're making it look that way. The truth could be far from that, but that's what you're doing with the incompetent strategy in this situation. One of the reasons is the whole SRC recommendation, the public didn't agree with it. And then after Stuart Young, because obviously if he continued to be prime minister if they won, well then it's a moot point, but you lost. And now the public doesn't agree with the pension. And not only are you doubling down on one of the biggest situations that caused you to lose the election, because that's wonderfully smart, brilliant political strategy, right? Yeah, you can't get more genius than that. But then you fail to address it ad hominem, ad hominem. One could argue, to what extent are you not actually debating the merits of the situation, but you're trying to distract with a straw man argument? See, two could play with the buzzword game. Because in what world outside of your base, which again, I don't know if it's 200,000 or 7,000. Someone tell me, what is the base of the PNM at this point? Because all of the PNM till I die people, unless you're one of them 7,000, you're fooling yourselves. Because if the party was that important to you personally, you should have come out and vote. But you left your fate up to other people. You didn't bother to participate. So are you really supporters of the party? To what extent is half of those rallies just a set of hangers-on that only care about what they could get and don't actually bother with helping the party move forward? Meanwhile, you have, I don't know, yes men, brown nosers, telling these politicians exactly what it is they want to hear, not what they need to hear, and then they come out and say nonsense like this. They haven't even addressed the fact that is it proper for a man that didn't even do the job for 2 months, 6 months, to get a pension for the rest of his life, paid for by the taxpayers? All of their selective ethics gets suspended. But then also, they can't address the political fallout of the SRC recommendations, the political fallout of Stuart Young's appointment as leader, because Penelope Beckles initially, and I do believe the news reports corrected it, but the video clip, she said, the leaders of the party, of which Stuart Young was never officially made leader of the PNM, she ended with Stuart Young. Eric Williams, Patrick Manning, Dr. Keith Rowley, Stuart Young, and others, whoever was in between. But he never earned that position. So this one issue doubles down on 2 to 3 losing election positions, and then I'm confused. You want to say that you're going to win the next election? Well, at this point, dare I say, to what extent do you know that's not actually true? You're just hoping that you could fake it till you make it, and you're hoping that the government stumbles. To be fair, they might. They might. One of the things, and this carries over to another topic which I'll hit tomorrow, I don't have time to hit it today, I don't think, is that there was also a question with regards to the independent senators. Not just with regards to this bill, but with regards to this bill. Now, the Senate did pass the Prime Minister's pension bill. It had independent senators to support it. There were those who abstained. But yeah, I guess you could say the majority voted for the bill. Of course, that both brings the whole question about the independence, which was raised by the government. It colors it a different way. Government is attempting to intimidate senators during a debate on the pay and pension bill. I don't know how true that is, to be honest. I really don't know. Some of them abstained, some of them went for it. There's more about that there that I'll discuss another day, because part of it is perception and the precedents that have been set and some of the carryover baggage of some of those independent senators, I'm sure. But not all of those independent senators have carryover baggage, because some of them are new. How fair is it to judge them on just a few votes? I don't think it is. But again, I did say it's not impossible for the government to sink their own ship. Maybe this is one of those issues that will happen. However, I do want to at least start what is the biggest story coming out of the weekend. So let's go straight into today's daily review. Doors open up. All right, so I don't know if I'll be able to get through all of it today, but at the end of the day, you have to be living under a rock if you haven't seen. The front page for the last couple of days, if not the last few days, has been with regards to the situation with CPEP and all of the people who essentially on the breadline. At least two of the daily newspapers, it seems, have already started to interview some of the, I guess now you could say, former CPEP workers and the situation that they're in. Now, some of the things I have to say I do find alarming, not in the sense of it's alarming of, oh gosh, how could that happen to them? But alarming in the sense of perhaps we have allowed this whole thing to grow way beyond the scope that it should have been. The problem, whatever the problem is that existed, has gotten way too far out of hand, because as far as I am aware, CPEP was never a full-time job. CPEP was never, and this is one of those things where people are like, well, the minimum wage. This is one of the mistakes that politicians make in America, and they want to make it here, because the minimum wage needs to be a living wage. But a living wage for a single person and a living wage for a family of four is two different things. Which one are you going for? And when you want to make the minimum wage doable for a family of four, you need to take a step back and think. Every little itty-bitty nonsense job is supposed to be able to support a family of four. That is not necessarily healthy for the economy. And when I say any nonsense job, I'm not even talking about certain low-skill jobs. We could debate the issue with regards to fast food workers, jobs on domestic workers, jobs on day laborers and stuff like that. We're talking any job. That's what a hard cap minimum wage says, or a hard floor. In this case, would technically be more correct. Now, I want to introduce this here, because I did say earlier, one of my fears, it's not that we're fully realizing it, but we're starting to kind of see the bare outline begin to take shape. It didn't take shape yet, much less got filled in. But the National Trade Union Center, its General Secretary, Michael Anisette, he has thrown his support behind the over 10,000 CPEP workers. Now, here's the key, and I'll appreciate this to some extent, right? NATOC acknowledges the stated concerns of the government regarding allegations of nepotism, cronyism, and poor governance in the previous award of CPEP contracts, many of which it has been alleged was granted to politically connected individuals aligned with the former PNM administration. However, we state emphatically, workers must not be made to bear the economic burden of the misconduct or failings of contractors. I think, to some extent, that only addresses part of the issue. An issue, to be fair to the UNC, that has been raised, whether on the record or off the record, with me in conversation with others, whether on air or off air. The perception out there that certain government work was essentially job programs to ensure that the people who would vote for us are dependent on our social generosity via making sure these things happen so they'll keep us in power. It's the dependency syndrome, of which I don't think anyone who thinks that ideology or theory to be true wants to say, but not CPEP's not part of that at all. No. But then there is also the fact that is CPEP supposed to be a situation for sustainable employment? But here's the key. As much as Michael Anisette wants to try to say he acknowledges the government, whatever, blah, 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 the key point in what he said was, that he supports the workers. He did say we support the government's vision to revamp CPEP into a more transparent skill-building initiative. This aligns with our shared goals of a people and worker-centered approach to governance and national development. I hate to say this, but to some extent, the last time we had him on this show, which was a long time ago to be fair, but the last time we had him on this show, he wasn't, depending on how direct you are with your questions and what you want to touch on and what you want to adjust. He's not all for that. Because I always say, and people say, why do I think this? This is to some extent why. A union, in my opinion, while you negotiate against management of the company, and therefore you are technically negotiating against the company when it comes to negotiating for the working conditions of your members, a union is also a stakeholder in said company, and therefore has an incentive, whether they understand it or not, to ensure that their employer doesn't go belly up. It's somewhat similar to a business that has a finite resource like oil. You have a responsibility to not just drill, baby, drill, and waste the oil, or we're going to discount half of the oil field because we need sales. Well, that's product you'll never get back. We'll see if and when that comes around to bite Russia in the you-know-where, in the long run. Because it's not just always about making the money in the short term. It's about making money long term for businesses. And for unions, it's not just about getting salary increases in the long run, but it's about ensuring job security of its members in the long run. Sorry, salary increases in the short run. And with regards to CPEP, I do have to wonder if it's reached the point, because again, the UNC has met a situation, right? They're still in the we're meeting things coming from opposition, now transforming into government. We didn't cause none of this. We met all of this. And to what extent has the CPEP problem grown so big that to try to detangle it while putting protections in place for workers is not practical anymore? Not unless you want to have it take so long that you won't even be finished by the next election. Meanwhile, the government is saying, well, you know, where's the money? Where's the money? Where's the money? And make no mistake, I have made no secret that in my opinion, the first place that we should look at to save money is wages for people who aren't doing any work, who are not productive, who are redundant, who are a waste of time. One of the things the government brought up is ghost gangs in CPEP, which, does anyone have any evidence to refute that? Because I think that's one of those things where we all believe it to be true. And it might not necessarily be true, but the problem with the situation is it's so complex and it's go way beyond the pale. Does it deserve a chance? I'm not talking about the workers, I'm talking about how CPEP exists. So, they have, of course, the initial reports. Over 300 contractors and 10,500 workers essentially were put on the breadline. Of course, we had the initial reactions from members of the opposition, some of which I'm okay with, because at the end of the day, you know, people like Brian Manning, to a lesser extent, MP Denobriga, because this is the initial reaction, and it's fine to show concern for the workers in the moment, right? Because they're not necessarily speaking detailed with regards to, okay, what was the alternatives, why is it bad? They're just responding to, well, they were fired, and 10,500 workers on the breadline is in theory a bad thing. To what extent were they actually getting a proper wage anyway, and were not part of an unhealthy economic situation? Because here's another thing that I want to make sure, and I'll probably say everything that I said on this topic today, tomorrow, or sometime later in the week. I remember around 2008 or so, I didn't notice it before, but around that time, and it has never changed. Anytime I have looked into the matter, it has, for the most part, this has never changed in the last 17 years. The difficulty of small business to get employees, whether it is businesses and small business. I ain't talking about big banks and fast food chains and stuff, but even they also probably felt it to some degree. Family businesses, businesses of friends, businesses that I go to, that I use, that are not necessarily connected to me in any personal way, but that I patronize. And we're talking from Diego Martin all the way to Tobago and everything in between along the east-west corridor. We ain't just talking about some little subsection in Port of Spain, Woodbrook, including El Socorro and the like. Issues about getting staff, in part because the labor market was set out of balance by initiatives like CPEP that seems fine for the government, or social programs. But the proof is, look at least in America, the COVID release programs that basically incentivize people not to work. Now, we in Trinidad, we even more worthless, because some of these people have mortgages to pay off and 2-year-olds to see about, and they're doing it off of a CPEP wage, apparently. Now, it's fine if you have nothing and you do CPEP for a couple months. But how many of these people were not just doing CPEP for a couple months? And then the other thing is, the last time I saw a CPEP gang, they were just sitting on the street corner. How many people, when you see a CPEP gang, and it might be more than one gang, I don't know, but it seems like it's 20 people, of which 6 are working and 14 are sitting in the shade. You know what I noticed the last 2 mornings? There were like 3 people cutting the grass around the savannah. One had a tractor. The other 2 had a weed whacker and was holding up a screen. They didn't have a lot of hangers on and extras to just watch, like if there was some kind of, 80% management or supervisor or some nonsense. And I saw it this morning. It was closer to my home, where there were a handful of people, like 3 or 4, cleaning up weeds and grass bush growing out along the roadside. They have a whole set of watchmen. It's interesting how that happened. Where did those people come from? Local government? Hey, if you told me those people are the people that say, we here to work, I'll believe you. They need CPEP for that. I wonder why. There's a whole legal dimension into this, so this story is not finished, but I'll end here with this. Minister of Public Utilities, of which CPEP was put into in the new change-up in government and cabinet and line responsibilities. Mr. Padarat, well, first of all, there's the politics question, of which it is said, well, the year before the contracts are up, that's when the contracts are renewed. Yeah, but you know what? Norms are not musts. Norms should never be confused with proper. Just because it's normal doesn't mean it's right. And doesn't mean that we have to do it. We have a legal responsibility to do it that way. Now, unfortunately, there might be some amount of argument for legal expectation or legally having an expectation. I'm not a lawyer, forgive me. But beyond that, I think there's also, this is what the minister said, we intend to bring back CPEP to its core mandate. It was meant to be a program that transitions people out of that temporary type of employment and get them into more sustainable jobs. I don't doubt that there's politics involved in this. Because where the opposition would be right, and I do believe maybe MP Manning and MP De Norberger were implying or alluding or getting to the point of, not too sure about the rest of them. Maybe the opposition leader too, I can't remember what his statements are. But the initial statements about compassion, and maybe they didn't say it directly, or all of the coach reported didn't say it directly. But as much as I said that this situation might be too far out of control and you need to blow it up, to what extent was it completely necessary to just go cold turkey on the 10,500 workers immediately? Is the money savings to the government that necessary? Well, it might be. It might be, right? Some of the things they're talking about are rentals that were unused, unutilized. You didn't need to fire people because of that. Now, it might be hard with 300 plus contractors to sift through who are the good ones and who are the bad ones, and maybe most of them are bad, and that's why you pull the plug on everybody. But the flip side is the distress that you put at least, I won't say all, but at least some of these people under. 10,000 ain't a small number of people. But the flip side of that is, technically the minister's right. Forget the politics between the PNM and the UNC over this matter, of which I do believe there's a lot of politics for the PNM with regards to this. But I do believe the minister is right. CPEP, as I said before, was not meant to be your long-term job. Why are we fooling ourselves to think that the program is working as intended? Our economy cannot grow with so much of our labor force on things like CPEP and ERP. It's not. Yeah, the work needs to be done, but let's be real now. Let's be real. In theory, that whole CPEP gang is supposed to be doing the work and knock it out in a couple hours in the morning, right? Is that what you see? No, that's not what you see. That is not what you see at all. What you see is a lot of people who are there to collect a check and nothing else. And this is where NATAC has come out on the side of labor. I said it before, and maybe people underestimated it. The interests of labor and the interests of government at times can be parallel, but they never naturally intersect. And more often than not, they diverge. This is the beginning where we're seeing the outline form of labor issues that are going to go against the government. And the PNM is hoping to try and make it an issue, to divest that relationship. Now we have to wait and see how the government handles it. We'll continue to monitor this story. But let's take a break. When we come back, we'll welcome the media ambassador. Stay tuned. This is Talking Man on WSN. We'll be right back after this.
are limitations in all healthcare sectors,
Correct.
not just this country,
Yes.
where the numbers will surpass the amount of doctors and nurses to provide that quality care. When we're talking about holding a patient's hand, giving them the support, emotional support that they need, advice, that gap. You are providing that pivotal gap, so that really makes you stand out from all other NGOs as far as my experience goes.
Yes, I actually go into the homes also of the patients.
Feeling drained? Struggling to keep up? It's time to take control of your wellness. On this episode of Wellness Unlocked, we're diving into the key nutrients your body needs for all-day energy and balance. With 100% or more of your daily essential vitamins, plus added chromium to support healthy blood sugar, this is complete wellness in a single soft gel. Join us as we uncover how small changes can make a big impact on your health. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and take the first step toward better health.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Welcome back to Talking About WSN. My apologies, the media ambassador is not here. I do believe that he is busy with something as a police officer. That is understandable. So I suspect we're not going to have him today. Hopefully we could have him later on in the week. But with that said, it does give me the opportunity to continue with this topic. Now, one of the interesting things would be there has been a lot of talk with regards to the legal action with regards to CPEP and the firings. To what extent could this go through? This will be a test with regards to how the industrial court, there was already a ruling, I can't remember all the details, but there was already a ruling where the Court of Appeal, I believe, overturned something to do with the industrial court on a different matter. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out moving forward, because the government can potentially make a case that, look, every $10 million, $20 million, $75 million count, right? The flip side is, this is one of those things where sometimes, and I said this before, the process. What is the process? To what extent could you justify this whole situation? Now, the other thing is this, in a strange twist of fate, I do wonder for the court if it would matter. It all depends on if the government's lawyers, depending on if representation for CPEP workers actually try to file a lawsuit. If the government lawyers want to point to the fact that, look, it's not as though these were sustainable living wages anyway. And that's not what the program is about. So, ethically speaking, allowing the situation to persist, it might not be what the individuals who are employed by CPEP want, but it might be what they need. Politically, there is also that question of that dynamic. Because like I said, we will look at the state of the country. We will look at the state of CPEP gangs. We will look at the people just sitting down in the shade. And this is not a unique phenomenon to Trinidad. They have jokes and stereotypical jokes about work crews in America with regards to digging up holes to deal with public utility stuff and road repairs in America, right? You know, one guy does all the work and 8 guys supervise and monitor. They have those jokes in the States as well, and I'm sure elsewhere. But the question is, all right, fine, that is human nature when you don't have a proper handle of control over it. But to some extent, we need to exercise accountability here. And again, the question is, was this the right way? Could you have fired some and not all? Could you have suspended the contracts but not necessarily fired them? Could you have maybe said, look, we have intentions to change the program and it will continue to run as is for the next month or two? Now, the other thing is this, and this is where the government on a practical level might have a strong argument. To what extent is the government going to say, listen, we're in a deficit. We have to figure out how to end the financial year, how to afford sustaining government expenditure, which includes salaries for all of the other public servants, let's not forget. As well as, I don't know, whatever program or grant that's paying out for the next couple of months that you want to get, some of which going back to school might be, you know, during July, August, because the new budget's going to be what? October? So whatever back to school program or grant or whatever that you're hoping on, the laptop program, all of that has to be done within this year's budget. Maybe you take out a loan, so you know you transfer over the financial expenditure, you know, you kind of do it that way to try to push it down the line to next year's budget. But how much more loans can we afford to take, really? So to some extent, you have to curtail expenditure now, for now, because we're in July. May was done at a deficit. May required loans. I don't know if they actually told us about June in that level of detail, as they told us about their intentions for May in their first press conference, the first postcard. Now, at the end of the day, to some extent, the opposition does have to do their due. Because again, the process, as much as I could argue that there are a lot of practical reasons for the government doing what they did, at the very least, did they explain the process properly? And it's not just to say, oh, there's a problem and we have to deal with the problem. But then you also have to explain why this solution is the best solution. It's the solution that is the most pertinent one given the conditions all around. Not just speaking to the problem that you find, but also the conditions of what about the people, who's going to do work in the interim for whatever work that was done, etc., etc. This is one of the areas where the previous administration failed, and the current administration, if they're not careful, because this is not even a political failing. This is human nature. I don't want to have to explain things. Why do I explain things to you? Some of it is arrogance. Some of it is laziness or inability or a lack of confidence in your own selves and your own skills. A lot of politicians, they talk publicly, then they put their foot in the mouth, then they perceive the negative reaction to the public, not fully comprehending the fact that at least to some extent, not always, it was their fault. They don't think most of the time, I suspect they don't think that it was their fault when it was, because there are also times when the public responds in an unfair manner. But it's very easy to take too much copium and say every time the public has an issue with what I said, it's because they don't understand. Well, you're the only one with the knowledge, so whose fault is it that we don't understand? And in this case, with regards to CPEP, to be fair, neither side is really going into specific details. And one could argue, well, Sean, how is the opposition supposed to have specific details? Well, yes, in year 10, the UNC ain't going to know what is going on. But in year 1, they knew what was going on. Year 1 of the Dr. Keith Rowley administration, the then UNC opposition should have had a fair understanding about what's going on, because they left the country in the state that the PNM found it, and it works both ways. The PNM left the country in the state that the UNC now finds it, so they should kind of have an idea what's going on in CPEP. They renewed the contracts, right? Even if they didn't do it directly. I'm not saying that Stuart Young or Farah Sawari as local government minister or whoever was the local government minister after, when I can't remember his cabinet reshuffles. But I am not saying the cabinet of Stuart Young or the cabinet of Dr. Keith Rowley directly made all these decisions. Maybe it was people in the middle level, but the point is, most of those people would have been your people. Or most of those people would have spent 10 years under you, at the very least. You could make some calls, find out what's going on. And you would have had a fair amount of, hopefully you would have, 10 years in government, had a fair amount of institutional knowledge that you would have retained when discussing these issues, because you would have treated with them right. You would have just, you know, ignored them for years. But did you? That is possible, because some of the communication from the government implies that they willfully don't do their research on some of their own work. But it implies, I can't prove it. Neither side is really offering us, because it goes back to the arguments that the PNM had with regards to Stuart Young. Oh, it's an ad hominem attack. But you're not actually treating to the issue that the public doesn't think it's fair for him to get the pension. So all the government is doing is just responding to the public in that case. You're not actually defending the issue. You're not doing the complete, holistic approach. You're kind of just picking and choosing what angle you want that is most convenient to you, and you're ignoring the rest, and you're hoping that everybody will ignore the rest, and your diehards will ignore the rest. They'll just go with whatever line you give them to go down. And it works the same way for the UNC. But the problem is, where does that leave us? That leaves us with a certain amount of division. And again, even the Prime Minister had to acknowledge the fact that business as usual for politics isn't going to work. So she brought in outsiders. But to what extent is that enough? On this issue, politically speaking, I think it's a losing case on both sides. I don't think the opposition is going to be very effective on this matter. Maybe they will if it turns into a real big old bacchanal. But you're kind of depending on the government to fumble the ball, which is possible. Minister Parat has already started to cement his public perception as a communicator. It's going to take some time for that to trickle down to the rest of the population, and it's very highly dependent on how he continues as a public communicator. But hey, Faris Anwari started off brilliantly. Very charismatic guy, and at the beginning, seen very highly. But at some point, your deficiencies catch up with you if you don't work on them, if you allow them to persist. Will that happen to Minister Parat? I'm not saying it will, because he now starts. Will he learn? Will he grow? Will he adapt? I don't know. But the lack of information on this issue on both sides leaves a lot to be desired. Because are we really getting... When it's debated in the court of public opinion, we're getting mostly emotional arguments. Oh my gosh, the poor workers. Oh my gosh, the poor treasury. And the poor taxpayers. That's essentially what it boils down to. The government might not sound emotional, but the lack of a proper presentation with regards to their plans. It's not like we haven't seen any other point in time where they didn't speak to us about their intentions, right? Where they wanted to hold back, where they wanted to shield us from the ugly truths of the daunting task. Because we're children to them. And that's the thing. There's a temptation of not wanting to reveal information to the public because it's safer. But safer for whom? Is it safer for the public? Sometimes, yes, it is safer for the public to not reveal everything to us. More on that later this week. But it's more often not safer for the politicians to not reveal everything for us. Not because we can't handle the truth, but because they don't know how to spin it that will make it acceptable to us. Not always is it a situation where it's negative to us. Sometimes it's positive to us. But then in those cases, they don't know how to explain it properly so that we can appreciate it. I mean, the proof of what I just said is in the results. The previous administration has a lack of transparency. And dare I say that we started to see the death of transparency in this administration over the last couple of days, over the weekend, on Friday. It doesn't matter who asked the question. That does not factor in on whether or not the question being asked is valid or not. Always remember that. Otherwise, then our whole system of government makes no sense. But it wasn't just CPEP. Farsa warriors come out to say that the UNC is leading a reign of terror, which, I swear, if you wanted to be a Shakespearean actor, go to drama school. We now start. If you're going to start off with reign of terror, when it's not blatantly obvious to everybody in the country, they will look at you and you will look silly because you started off at 100 and you have nowhere to build and you put yourself in a position where it's very difficult to backtrack, which Kamala has done herself at times as leader of the opposition. Because again, what is the obvious, oh my gosh, this is horrible. There's no justifiable reason for this at all. Now, you could argue that maybe in the net, some of these firings are not justifiable. But to be fair, I think it's all debatable because that's the WASA board, other WASA managers, I think. Then, of course, you have CPEP. Then you have in local government, certain people in local government, the Rural Development Agency, 140 change agents. Farsa Wari was complaining about that as well. Now, I do believe that the local government minister, Khadija Amin, she pointed to the fact that, look, the objectives, because they're looking to review the initiatives and policies introduced by the previous administration. And the report says that the objectives include continuing programs that are effective, repurposing or discontinuing those that do not meet current goals, making local government more efficient and people-centered. And to be fair, to some extent, that could mean that programs that did have, you might say, oh, but this program had a positive impact. That change maker had a positive impact. But what the government is saying is, it's not just about programs that are effective, but some of the maybe marginally effective, slightly effective, it still has to make the goal of efficiency and being people-centered. And just because it might have some good results doesn't mean it makes cuts. Because we can't afford to have, there's an opportunity cost. If I have something that is 50% productive, I don't have resources that could have been put into something that's 100% productive. That might have a higher return on investment. And you might think, oh gosh, it's not about profit. Time out. What we do with our money and the returns we get for it directly impact our development. Do you want more development or less development? So, the thing is, if Farah Sawari condemned the firings, if Farah Sawari wanted to say that too many of our fellow citizens are now facing uncertainty due to their loss of jobs, and that's a negative, and as the opposition, we will take up their cause and look into their matters, and potentially, because I do believe the PNM provided a free legal clinic for the CPEP workers. Now, I don't know how extensive it was, but you could say all of those things. You could condemn the situation, but what you don't do is, if you go to the point where it's a reign of terror, it's like calling every evil person Hitler. Well, at some point, the alarm bells will stop ringing. And this is what the opposition did. Everything was the worst, no matter how small. So at some point, the public will stop responding to these dramatic calls of a Shakespearean actor. Oh my gosh, It's so bad. It's the worst thing ever. This is the worst thing ever. That is the worst thing ever. Then eventually what's going to happen is you're going to say, this is so bad. It's the worst thing ever. And the public's going to say, oh, well, it's Tuesday, so yeah. They're going to discredit you. You could still use strong language. You just need to know what strong language to use. The game now starts, and you going off half-cocked so soon? Because again, a lot of these things are still subjective. The change makers from the Ministry of Local Government, that's subjective. The WASA situation, now granted, certain names becoming the CEO, that was interesting. If you want to make that an issue, MP Gonzalez, go right ahead, Marvin Gonzalez, you do that. I have no issue with that. I have no issue with questions being asked. Questions that were asked that were not answered because I plead the fifth. I'm paraphrasing. Obviously, it's not what they said, but they essentially did that. Maybe, let me not say essentially did that, because the Fifth Amendment in America does mean something very different than what they did. But they kind of did that. They kind of didn't want to answer any questions. Although in this case, they're saying, for the benefit of the people. What's the proof for that? Someone? Anyone? Government is running the risk of doing everything it can to expend its goodwill for minimum gains. Brilliant. Opposition, and meanwhile, is trying to continue spending. It's like deficit spending for the budget, deficit goodwill for the party. Just digging that hole deeper. More importantly, there were times and I'm not going to address it maybe until tomorrow with Karen about the TTRA. There were times in the TTRA debate when Faraz Sawari actually sounded very brilliant. But those are the times when he had a little bit more to say with regards to detailed things. Not just, oh, that's bad. It's just a disaster of epic proportions and there's more to come. And this also is subjective because, like I said, I believe that the public sector needs to be cleaned up. There's too much wasted money there. If what we were told is true, if the monthly wage bill for the government is $2 billion, per month, that's $36 billion a year. If you get a quarter of that down, that's $9 billion. If you could justify reducing public wages by getting rid of redundant workers, not by pay cuts, not by getting rid of people that are actually working, but by getting rid of people that aren't working, that aren't showing up to their jobs, that aren't productive, that are just there to collect a check. If you somehow could drop the wage bill by a quarter, assuming the $2 billion is true, that's potentially the deficit right there. Now, CPEP is barely scratching the surface on that. But the opposition is trying to, they took it in front. Oh, the government is anti-labor, which is very funny because there's literally a parallel situation where the government is essentially conceding something to labor. It's giving into a demand of the labor movement. It's very interesting. Only in Trinidad are we going to have the government, and I'll go into this tomorrow, the government and opposition on different sides of two issues. On one issue, one is pro-labor, one is anti-labor, and on the other issue, one is the one that was anti-labor here is pro-labor there. The one that is anti-labor here is pro-labor there. Only in I don't know if I've seen this anywhere else, where the same group of people can be pro-labor and anti-labor depending on the issue. Well, then what is the principles behind your party's ideologies if you're that wishy-washy? But the sad part is, technically speaking, both of them are that inconsistent. Now, granted, one could argue, Well, the right thing is the right thing. So what is the right thing for one might not be the right thing for the other. It might be right to go with labor here. It might not be right to go with labor there. The problem with that is I don't think they really think that far ahead, to be honest. And more importantly, some of the general principles of the two issues potentially overlap. So you are potentially being directly hypocritical, taking such a decisive stand, one being for the government, one being pro-labor, one being anti-labor. And it's very generalized. It's very, very, very generalized. We have Digger Martin on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on here.
I'm sure. And I've seen some data that what I relay is accurate and I'm not let down the cookie trap. With respect to teams, gangs, there are 978 that I'm told of in the 39th constituency of Trinidad and Tobago. There were 443 in PNM stronghold. Listen to the differences. In the UNC stronghold, which is 15 constituency, it was 207. In the marginal constituency that the PNM targeted, there were 328 gangs. The average of the teams in the PNM control was about 30, in the UNC control was about 20 or so. So there's a big disparity. In the marginals, there were about 33. What is startling, for example, in some of the marginal seats that the PNM targeted, Toco Sandy Grande, there were 51 teams there, way, way outside the average. In Talparo, there was 45 gangs. In San Fernando West, there were 46 team gangs. In Maruga, there were 42. In St. Joseph, there were 36. And that was way above the average, double the amount in the UNC area, and about 20% over in the PNM stronghold. So that tells you how the PNM was using the CPEP to woo voters. If we have to get it right, there must be equity in all of these community-based CPEP things. And I have no idea that they're shutting it back and reopen it, restructure it, unlike what they have done with Petrotrin. They shut it down to reopen it, and they didn't make any headway with it after 5 or 8 years. The other issue I want to raise is the TTPS, my pet subject. And we have seen where a judge has halted the elections of the TTPS based on the viability of one ACP who wanted to go back on the second division executive, and they just stopped him because apparently he has been there twice as president and one time as secretary. So based on what I'm hearing about the constitution of the second division, etc., he should not have made himself available for election. My take on it, if everybody see the history of this ACP was instrumental in the day of policing, and he was basically, I'm using the term, quote, dumb in the Joint Select Committee. He was silent on all his colleagues who plan this day of policing. And how can he be put in charge of the Secretary again to come with another day of policing to encourage the blue flu virus in the police service? So this particular ACP, he has question the answer, and in sync, the POLC Service Commission has issues and they are not faithful to the mandate of rooting out alleged corrupt behavior of certain people in the executive. They have shortchanged the new commissioner of police. They have given him an executive that is tainted. I believe what they should have done, give him a proper, clean executive. There are a lot of junior officers under the rank of superintendent who, from my vantage, are very, very excellent, and I believe they could fill the vacancies in the executive. We remove the whole top of the executive. If we want to do a real restructuring, that is why you bring in a team. You're bringing a team with his executive to do the restructuring. I'll go and have a nice morning.
Thank you, Gola. A couple of things there. With regards to CPEP, I think herein lies the problem. You don't know for sure if what you said was true. I don't know for sure if what I said with regards to similar things was true. But I do know this. I think we've reached the point now where CPEP is so bad that to some extent both the PNM and the UNC kind of need to explain their parts in what happened with CPEP. With regards to the police union, there are a lot of union leaders who I don't trust, to be honest. And this could be another one of them. I will say this. We do have 2 callers waiting. I just need to say this. The Police Social Commission, they have no authority over assistant commissioners and under. Now, if you want to talk about the DCPs and the COP, fine. And the commissioner, fine. But, you know, the guy that you brought up is an ACP. They can't touch him. They actually did lament the fact that they don't have the ability to select and discipline ACPs because that's part of the pool for commissioner. And you know, there's impracticalities with regards to that. But they can't touch them. That's up to the commissioner. And to some extent, you know, the last substantive commissioner. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? We have 2 callers on the line. I think Davide's first. Good morning, caller, on here.
Hi, Sean. Morning.
Morning.
So I don't like to comment on other person's comment, but I challenge your previous caller to say something good about the police service when next he is speaking. You know, he calls every day like myself, and I enjoy his contribution, but I am yet to see him say anything good about the TTPS. With respect to the selection for the Welfare Association, I think it's about time to do something, and I agree with the previous caller that this individual is really a waste of time, and he has not been contributing anything meaningful or anything that would progress the TTPS in any meaningful way, you know? So with the CPEP, Sean, I'm hearing many comments. I know you spend quite a lot of time on it, but I am very much intimate with the CPEP. I have served as doing accounting work for some of the contractors, and the information I'm hearing is very conflicting. It's not what I know these contractors to be. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, in Malabar Mousica,
could you say how many?
You have just about 10 contractors. You know, maybe some other constituencies might have a little more between 10 and 15, depending on the geographical site.
But caller,
are you saying something?
Yeah, could you tell me how many not who they are, but just how many you dealt with personally that you know directly?
Well, I am in the executive in Malabar Mousica, and I've dealt with all of them.
The 10 it's just 10, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll explain why after. Continue.
No, not a problem. But the thing about it is that, and we speak about collateral damage, and I'm sure if the government was really concerned about the workers and them, they would have handled this thing differently. Because there could have been a transition from the old contractors to the new contractors, where the workers could smoothly go over into, you know, although because the CPEP workers are continuously CPEP workers that I would know of. Sometimes they move from contractor to contractor. but the pool of workers remain basically the same, right? In any one geographical area, the pool remain the same. And if you're going to have new contractors coming in, then that transition could have been smoother and persons would not have had problems with back to school books and who paying for a car and who now get a mortgage and that sort of thing. So Sean, I really hope that the government can resolve this matter with CPEP ASAP and really help the workers. What you were saying, my last comment here with what you were saying just now about the unions, the trade unions, it is really an anomaly because you cannot be pro-union and really anti-union. You can't be pro-worker and anti-worker. It's either you're for the worker or you're against the worker. And the minister in the ministry, our dear MP Falabre, was saying that he cannot comment. That is identical word. He cannot comment because the other minister didn't say something already. So he is really a catch-22, but I really hope that for sake of the workers' sake, that they really do something as smoothly and quickly as possible, and don't wait until the new budget for 25-26. Sean, thanks again for the opportunity, and you have a nice day.
Thank you, caller. I have a lot to say, but we do have another caller that was waiting, so hopefully we still have the call, and we take the call now. Good morning, caller. You on here?
Good morning, Sean. Thanks for taking my call.
Morning.
Some weeks ago, before the election, I called into your program to predict that the PNM was going to lose. I was right. That did happen. I also said that in due course, Mr. Young would go back to his private life. That remains to be seen, but I expect it will happen in due course. I said this before as well. This is PNM country. And I say that because the PNM between 56 and 86 had 3 straight decades to imprint their DNA on the mind, social conscience, culture, public institutions, you name it. They imprinted their DNA in this country. And when our first, if you want to call it, opposition came into being, one of the things that I remember A.N.R. Robinson saying or commenting on was his ministers would often come to him to complain that they were facing this wall of intransigence from permanent secretaries in his departments. They were so used to doing it the PNM way that to come to face with something else was startling to them, and they didn't know how to handle it. And we saw that same thing happening recently when the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, declared that there were people behaving as if the election hadn't happened.
Yes.
And things were continuing as normal.
Yes.
And, you know, that wall of intransigence, the PNM has very skillfully manipulated and impacted on everything from public services to contracts, the whole bang of it. The fact that they gave those or made those contracts before the close of the election a few weeks ago suggests to me that they had an inkling at the very least that they were going to lose, and they were trying to tie the hands of the incoming government to keep those. And I think they bargained that they would not use valuable political capital at voiding those arrangements. And they have gone and done just that. Now, my concern is that going forward, we're going to exchange sugar for salt. The UNC will come with their own people and try to do a PNM on the country. And that is my concern with regards to new contracts being issued or being devised. Yeah. That the culture will continue. It won't change manifestly as the UNC hopes to. And I'm cautioning the people who are complaining about job losses now. Be mindful of aligning yourself politically with persons who are using you or prepared to use you for convenience, to make a point, to make a happy show. In this country, it is so difficult to get away from politics. It covers every aspect of our lives. And this is another case where employment has been politicized. Contracting out services has been politicized. And it's not having the best impact or effect on the population, on the people of this country. We need to get away from that. I know that the UNC in 5 years or less will not be able to undo the PNM machinery. It's just too deep. It runs too deep, and it's too much an impact on the culture of this place. But what they can do, where they see it plainly, is to try and undo some bits that make sense. It remains to be seen how they're going to deal with this matter of the new contract with Institute and Jahum, and I'm sure ICE are going to be able to make sure that there isn't any kind of political bias. I don't know how they can avoid that, given this is Trinidad and Tobago, but I'm hopeful. I'm not overly optimistic, but I'm hopeful. That's it.
Thank you, caller. A lot of good things there, but we do have another caller waiting. We'll take the last call for the morning, then I'll respond. I'll try and respond to as much as possible of the last 3 to 4 callers. Call on WhatsApp. Good morning, caller. You on here?
Good morning, Sean. Calling Miss Trin-City calling here.
Morning.
All right, I was listening to the submissions this morning. And are you hearing me?
Go ahead.
Are you hearing me, Claire?
Yeah.
Right. I was listening to your submissions this morning, and I've realized that we have to start critically thinking about this whole CPEP thing. All right. The last caller who spoke about the transition, that is fair, and that could be done. And that is a quick solution, transitioning from one contractor to the next. So that is not a problem. Let's go back to why CPEP was formed. CPEP was formed with an agricultural element in mind. The test bed for CPEP was during the 86 to 91 period under the NAR. That was the initial test bed. It was not a deliberate test bed, but what had happened during that period, because of loss of jobs in the 80s and so on, we had URP workers doing concrete work at the side of the road in the morning, and they were doing agricultural work on the abandoned estates in the evening after midday. That was the launching pad for self-sustainability in agriculture. When the Manning administration came in after the coup in the 91 election, they stopped it. Patrick Manning has gone on, and he has not provided an explanation as to why he stopped it. When CPEP was first formed, it was not to buy paint from the hardware store and paint stone on the side of the road, although all that was good. But the major part of CPEP was to have a strong, what you may call it, agricultural element, and I'll allow the local government bodies to clean the road and so on. CPEP could have helped out cleaning the road. But we lost our way with CPEP. It became a political tool of the PNM for a very long time. And with regard to the argument, with the Prime Minister's pension, Faris Alwari tried an ad hominem argument, and I saw it coming. But then he cited case law that does not relate to the issue of a president, of a prime minister getting $1 million a year pension for being king for a day. Makes no sense at all. So we plod on and we plug through, but what we have to understand is in terms of the national discussion on CPEP, it's not a question of pro-worker, pro-company, pro-worker. It's a question of pro-country. What has to be done for all of Trinidad and Tobago, and we have to critically think it through and critically make decisions to bring it to fruition. Have a good day, Sean. Take care. God bless.
Thank you, caller. I'll just say this. We do have another caller. We'll sneak in a call, but I'll just say this. The thing is, the reason why I say pro-worker, anti-worker is some of the decisions were made are so absolutist and so abrupt that it's not like if this was a measured approach and they explained everything to us, oh, this is for the good of the country. I know you're not saying that they're doing it for the good of the country, but just for everybody else. It's very abrupt. There's not a lot of explanation. There's not a justification to say, oh, well, for the good of the country. Because you could technically be, take different sides of different issues, right? That might seem contradictory, but then if you have the reasoning to back it up, it's fine. They don't have the reasoning to back it up. And what the caller is saying is it's supposed to be pro-country. We need the reasoning to back up so that we could, at the very least, so that we could believe that what you're doing is pro-country. We haven't reached a point where we're going to absolutely prove that what you're doing is pro-country, right? And that's the mistake that the last administration made. And to what extent is the current administration unknowingly or knowingly looking to continue that similar pattern? We'll take the last call. Good morning, caller, on here.
My recollection of how CPEP was formed is different to your caller. My recollection, it came out of the special works. Now, the special works was to give some employment coming up to Christmas for people who were unemployed, especially at that time as the sugar workers who would not be employed until January. Today, CPEP is to do work that government agencies are paid to do. And the unfortunate thing about it is that both of them don't do the work. The infrastructure they're supposed to maintain is not properly maintained, and so forth. So if I had to do, I would close down CPEP. I would not fire the workers. I would transfer them to the agency who's supposed to see about this infrastructure and see that it is done. Thank you. Any questions?
Well, only in that, I don't know if it'll be so easy to transfer them because the terms and conditions are based on CPEP, right?
They are closing it down.
Yeah. So
part of it, you're offering to give them permanent work with government.
Right. But I, to what extent do we have enough, or could we afford to give them a more substantial salary and have permanent positions for all of them?
More substantial salary.
Or the same salary?
The people getting.
Okay. All right. Thank you, caller.
Thank you.
I mean, it's not a crazy idea. Although, again, I don't know if the salary for CPEP is something that should be considered a long-term salary, right? With that said, one of the things, CPEP, the CPEP Company Limited, it's on the logo, Community-Based Environmental Protection and Enhancement Program. So the actual, note that none of that speaks to with regards to the intention of the hiring practices and the compensation package for these workers, right? It's one of the main pillars in the National Strategy for Development of the Green Economy of Trinidad and Tobago. CPEP focuses on environmental protection, enhancement, and beautification in service areas known as environmental work areas. To what extent have we seen, cutting the grass? Have we seen beautification? Note, a former senator who is on a different media platform, he said some of the stuff done in Port of Spain, if my memory serves correct, was done under his initiative, not under CPEP, beautification work, and we ain't even reach green economy stuff. So I think CPEP has had mission creep, mission bloat, and to some extent, I get it. Professor, what you said, that is in line with what I believe or what I thought and what I think the other callers also perceive to be the actual goal of CPEP, where it started. But it's turned into this thing. Now, a couple things to respond to. One, I don't think anything such as a smooth and quick transition of contractors was possible. Because the problem is you had the political dimension. So you had the contracts that were renewed just before the change in government. You have the allegations of ghost gangs, which are not new, right? So to say that we're just going to transition one contractor to the next. No, part of it is you have to, and then forget the ghost gangs. Again, it goes down to what is the accountability of CPEP, where 20 people on a street, 5 to 6 working, 14, 15, 16 sitting down on the side of the road, doing nothing, right? Or just watching. So there's a lot to CPEP more than just changing out the contractors, right? And here's the thing, with regards to Mr. Davide, who pointed out, he dealt with the CPEP contractors in one area. We don't know what was on the books of the government for that area. So you could speak to the actual gangs that existed. You could speak to the gangs that existed in that area. You can't necessarily, your experience, we can't automatically attribute it to the rest of the country. And more importantly, with regards to allegations like ghost gangs, yeah, it might not be the contractors you were dealing with, but there might be contractors in other parts of the country, and there's probably a certain level to the accounting that you won't see nationally. To what extent was that a window for somebody to do something that might have been less than legal and probably unethical, right? So I don't think a quick transition could have happened, and quick is relative. I think for our immediate needs, quick would have been literally now for now. Because again, to what extent is our current budget for the remainder of the financial year and the fiscal position that we are in part of the reason for doing this so quickly, which does not necessarily go well with regards to, as I think Davide pointed out, or some of the other callers pointed out, with regards to the government actually showing care for the CPEP workers. Now, to what extent is the problem so bad that there was no alternative but to blow it up? I don't necessarily agree with that, but I could understand when you combine the complexity of the situation with the time crunch, because we're trying to figure out the end of year fiscal financial situation. Is it the best thing to do for other considerations? Not necessarily. It might be the best thing to do for the budget. But then it goes back down to you all need to explain more, otherwise you're just looking like the past guys, to some extent. To some extent, you're just looking like the past guys. And notice who are the key speakers in a lot of these things. I'm just saying. Right? It might be PNM country, but on one hand, I think the PNM might be slipping. On the other hand, as was reminded to me, they did come back from 33.3. Right? I spoke about this with both Dr. Shimomet and Karen last week. They did come back 33.3. Don't think it's slipping. I think there's the potential for the PNM to slip, and it would no longer be PNM country. But the caller did point out something, and it could be that they want to fight fire with fire. That's always very tempting. Sometimes it's, they thief, I want to thief too. They did something wrong, I want to do the same thing, because I want to fight fire with fire. Even the TPP weren't immune to that thought, right? Falia at the very least admitted that with regards to the propaganda and utilizing THA jobs to pay people salaries so that they could conduct political propaganda for their party business, all the while trying to make it come across as THA business. I'll never forget that, because we didn't get a proper explanation for that. All of the goodwill in the election notwithstanding. But yes, the UNC might say, well, if they're going to do it, we could do it too. And then it'll be a tit-for-tat game. And that'll be just as bad or not worse than what we see. The last thing I'll say is this, with regards to unions. Ain't it interesting? Think about how many union leaders have become politicians. Some of them, you could argue maybe it worked out fine, maybe. You know, Basio Pandey is still regarded, or maybe post-career regarded with significantly high esteem, right? We remember what we had. Of course, there are other labor union leaders who are part of politics. And even now in this current administration, there are, I believe, 2 ministers, 1 junior, 1 senior. And to some extent, many, I mean, there was a previous Minister of Education who was a former head of tutor. I've heard things about some of the union leaders in the last couple of years who are hoping to then transition to some kind of higher office, whether appointed or elected. The current PSA president seems to be a very, very, very effective public speaker and politician in the making. Notice I said politician, not necessarily someone who has the skills to run the country. She's a union leader. She ain't been in politics yet. We don't know. I'm not going to say she's going to make a great political operator member of government, but as a political operator with regards to elections and the back and forth, the popularity contest, that is politics most of the time, not the governance side of it, showing a lot of promise there, union leader. And how many of these unions are not necessarily, in my opinion, doing right for their members in the long run? Because I could get you the salary increase you want now, but then we might end up like Petrotrin. Whether you agree with it or not. I agreed with transitioning out of Petrotrin, the shutting out of the refinery to the extent that what we see in hindsight gives people like me a little bit of buyer's remorse over my opinion on that situation back then. I've changed that, my opinion of the refinery over time, talking to some of the callers, talking to some of my colleagues. And that's one of the things. I very much appreciated Digger Martin and Dabadi. You see, one of the things with Mr. Digger Martin, he's willing to put his opinions out there, to start the conversation, to be the firecracker that starts the conversation. And to be fair, he's not insisting that he's the be-all and end-all in the conversation. He just wants to put his thoughts out there and let's speak about it. And I appreciate that, of course, Mr. Dabadi, you're willing to come back and engage. And we do so respectfully, and then we get constructive conversation. Same thing with all of the other callers today, so I appreciate the conversation a lot. This thing with CPEP, as Mr. Trincity said, it's for the good of the country, right? I mean, Stuart Young said it's for the good of the country. I didn't do it for personal gain. But the more you talk, the harder it is to believe that, because you're not effectively protecting the brand that you built up for most of the last 10 years. But the last year, things got a little squirrely. Why? That's one of my big questions. I don't even know if Stuart Young knows the answer, to be honest, much less his cabinet, his former cabinet colleagues and his opposition bench colleagues, much less the rest of us. Of course, the government will have a lot of negative opinions to say about that, but it's biased. What are we going to do? But both of these issues, because the other one is ETTRA/WASA. Government preempted those decisions before they came into power. And now the CPEP seems to be going maybe too fast. And people are saying, hey, there are better ways to treat with CPEP. I will argue there's better ways to treat with WASA and TTRA. But they're rushing into these things. And I wonder how long will it take before the parallel interests of the union and the government diverge further and further until miraculously, just wait, you'll see union leaders next to PNM opposition members as they start to talk about all the ills that the government is doing. But the government is not helping themselves when they do things like this without good enough explanation and guidance with the CPEP firings. And they leave us to our own devices for us to speculate on what is the actual truth. And if they don't like where the speculation ends up, it's not our fault because you left us alone when you had the initiative to engage with us. And if that sounds familiar, that's politics. Thanks to the callers. Unfortunately, the media ambassador can join us. Hopefully, like I said before, he'll join us sometime later in the week. This is Talking About on WSN Show. Michael Small here reminding you to have a good day, stay safe, remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other, and never forget that it's nice to be nice. And we could have constructive conversations on national issues for the good of the country and see each other tomorrow, hopefully. Bye.
WESN.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society.